Can I build on something? Ask you to build on something a bit. You mentioned Spengler, and you mentioned the seasons of civilization, or the peaks and troughs of civilization. I've always thought, I've always not entirely agreed with Spengler, although I do largely, but not entirely. The idea that it's hard baked in that you must have a winter of civilization. So what I'm trying to say here is less that it's just a hard baked in cycle and there's nothing that can be done about it. I feel like it's more like something. If you look at the fall of Rome, the Western Roman Empire, the campaigns of Alaric or something, or if you look at like the Mongol invasions, or perhaps the Black Death, something like that, that can take us down a peg significantly. For example, like a Great Dying or a meteor,
a reset type.
Yeah,
a reset.
But if you look at the general trend since the ancient world, it's still going up. For example, you're talking about how we're becoming more and more dysgenic and stupider and stupider, and yet we're also medical sciences better than it's ever been before. Space telescopes are more incredible than they've ever been. As a general trend, there might the graph goes up. There may be significant drops. Still,
well, no, that's an interesting point. But the yeah, as a general trend, yeah. So first of all, you can get two things. First of all, if you think of it as like a graph, like it's simplifying it immensely.
Sure.
For it to say that it's like that, right? I don't know if you can see that, but it's that it's a sort of a standard bell curve of civilization, okay? And the reality is going to be much more messy. And if you look at the data in my book, it is more. It is much more. So you're going to get things like, generally per capita major innovation, per capita GDP is going up, but then there's like the Civil War or whatever, right? And that retards it a little bit for a while. Or that it goes up in a predictable way, so up, but then sometimes you're going to get someone like Isaac Newton that's a complete outlier in brilliance, and so then just boom up here, right, and then back down. So yeah, I think you're right. There's humps and bumps. So you're quite right there. We shouldn't simplify it. So there can be, as it were, and I think Spengler talks about this. There can be a silver age,
yes,
as part of a downward trend. So we might argue that. We've been decreasing per capita major innovation since about 1870, but the internet, for example, maybe was a kind of silver age in a general system of decline. And secondly, and related to that, you can, of course, via just sort of chance and by virtue of the fact that this is humps and bumps, get even a really quite major innovation in a general period of decline. So something like the Greek battery, when was that? Like 200 AD? It's an electric battery. So they had electricity. And they didn't. I guess they didn't seem to understand its significance in the same way that the Chinese didn't really understand the significance of gunpowder. But they seemingly had a battery, an electric battery. They understood that. And then equally Greek fire, a Byzantine fire, which we don't understand what the hell that was, but somehow they managed to get fire to go on water and burn ships. We don't know what, it's guarded secret. But that was during the absolute decline that they came up with that. And then as for the idea that we're still innovating, but we're broadly in decline, that makes sense in terms of things like the Silver Age and the humps and bumps model anyway. But B, if you make a major innovation, then in some area, then that can cause a huge onset of not perhaps major innovations, but of minor innovations. So you can still be, although you are declining in per capita major innovation. I mean, you're definitely in decline. You can still increase in things like standards of living, as long as the extent to which you are making minor innovations based on a declining pool of major innovations. In terms of the degree to which that permits improved standards of living, whatever, as long as that level of minor innovation and occasional major innovation keeps ahead of the rise in population. And as long as the extent of that major and minor innovation compensates for an underlying decline in intelligence, as long as it manages to compensate for the deficiencies that are caused by that, standards of living will still go up.
Very, very interesting. So everything you've said there, which I would agree with, isn't really exactly in line with what Spengler described, other than the silver age and things. What I think is very interesting, when you first told me about your idea of these islands, these little Byzantiums, it's more, there's like a bifurcation. It's like, yeah, a lot of the world will become more dysgenic and lower IQ, but another section of the world will keep becoming more intelligent, if anything. And so you might have, within these small Byzantiums, you still get innovation and you still get progress.
I don't know if they'll become more intelligent. What we find in the data is that I call it the Rayner effect, is that the right are getting stupider, but the left are getting stupider more quickly.
Okay.
And so we're both sets are getting stupider. It's just the left are getting stupider rapidly, much more rapidly, because they don't want to have children and they resign from the gene pool and whatever, to a much greater extent than do people on the right, because they're religious and they it's one of the things that people talk about a lot in the UK, which is not really an issue in Finland so much, is housing shortage. And they say, oh yeah, I'd love to be able to have children, but I can't afford property. I'm like, well, if you were religious and you believed and you were having children for like the greater glory of God or something, then you wouldn't care about you'd bring them up in a shit little flat and hope that God would provide. But you're not. You're materialistic. And so the religious people, they don't care about these things. And that's why they end up having loads of kids. Like in this country, for example, there's a group called the Destined. They don't use contraception. They have an average of 6 children. And do you think they go on holiday every year to Spain with the family? Of course they don't. They sacrifice that for their weird belief that they're the Northern Finns are the chosen people, and it's in the Bible that that's the case, and whatever. But yeah, you're right about it would be islands of that would hold out, but the broader context, unless we can bring in some form of eugenics, would be that we would still be getting less intelligent, even on the right. It's just that it would be more quick on the left. Basically, the left wing white people would just sort of die out. They'd be gone.
So would that not be a form of natural selection eugenics then at that point?
And the low IQ white people, they will tend to just miscegenate, as which we know is the case. So they become part of the broader non-British areas. And then you would have these conservative right-wing, reasonably intelligent people. And then you'd probably get some non-whites that would like white align, like John. And then that would be kind of what would happen. And I guess there would be some sort of holdout, though I can't say how it would work. I don't suppose intelligence would go up in that context, because it would just sort of hold out, I guess. It might even go down.
This general trend you're talking about of just a lower intelligence across the board, but is it not the case that in a population of hundreds of millions or billions, there'll be outliers, there'll be very few of them, but there'll still be ultra geniuses. You still get a Newton, you still get an Einstein from time to time, and it only takes one mind. History showed us that, to sort of like a Newton or an Einstein or something. So
but the likelihood of yes, but the likely as the lower, so a genius is normally defined as that they have outlier high IQ, and an IQ is a ratio scale. So if we make the average 100, the average of 100 now is not the same as what that average was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So if you've got a really stupid population, you're going to get outliers, but there'll be outliers from the new average. Okay. And so the idea. So if a person has an IQ of 145 now, they're an outlier high intelligence. The average will be 85 by the end of the century among white people at this rate. So the idea of a Newton becomes witheringly unlikely, even if there's millions and millions and millions of people, because the variance is a new variance.
You become a somewhat smart person in a group of incredibly dumb people, basically.
Yeah,
the outlier is only ever so slightly more intelligent.
Yeah, he's like 2 standard deviations or something above or 3 standard deviations above the average. So, and I mean, you could say, okay, well, the population is going up, so on that basis, there will be more geniuses. But we did. My colleague did some calculations on this. The collapse in intelligence is so fast. It's like 1.5 IQ points per decade or something. That it's not gonna outweigh that. It's too fast. We're becoming rapidly too stupid for that to work. I often think to myself. I was thinking today. Who was I talking to? Yeah, this Northern Variant fellow. I was thinking, isn't it weird? Like when we think that the people that if it's 1.5 IQ points per decade, that's 15 IQ points in 10 decades in 100 years. So that implies that the people that were running, people like Enoch Powell, people of their generation, may be as much as a standard deviation more intelligent on average. Maybe it's probably less than that, but something like that, than kids born 10 years ago among the native population. And think of what that does to then people talk about the grown-ups are back in the room, or the grown-ups are back. Now that Labour are back, the grown-ups are back. Well, what are these grown-ups? These are stupid grown-ups compared to the grown-ups when we were kids. And also they've never suffered and never been through a war and stuff. And they're not and they're decadent and they make stupid decisions. They're not grown-ups.
Is there a way back from this, though, even on the scale of centuries? I mean, even Spengler says there'll be a spring again at some point. How do you see? It's not a terminal decline forever, is it? Until the sun blows up. It's not like a terminal decline forever, is it?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it's just a question of what. So if you look at what happened, let's look at what happened last time. So what happened last time was you have the collapse of Greece, you have the collapse of Rome. It's partly to do with declining intelligence and whatever, but it's also then to do with the fact that you then have a situation where you have a large population that have been able to become large because of a warm period, partly because of a warm period. And then you have the human-created warm period of civilization. So you have 2 warm periods. The civilization starts to collapse because of we're breeding against intelligence, essentially. So that's weakening the warm period, but you've still got this large population. And then you have a literal cold period that hits in the 6th century, and you have the Great Justinian Plague. And so then this is it. Then you have 60% of the population of Europe die, and you've got a situation where imagine that civilization is about excess. It's about more than you need. So if you're just up against it, you produce what you need. You can't have civilization. Once you're producing surplus, then you can go craftsman and whatever, and you can develop a bit. Once you're producing enormous surplus because of the innovations of the Industrial Revolution, such that we can produce massive amounts of food and other resources, then you get all of this stuff that we can do, and all of these people that can live that wouldn't otherwise have lived, and then you get medicine, and you get all of these more people that can live that wouldn't otherwise have lived, and their descendants and their descendants, and all these people. And they're all able to find a niche and to find a way of making money because of the enormity of the surplus that we have, which allows the medicine that they need and all of this stuff. If those supply lines are cut, which they will be, because we won't be intelligent enough to do things eventually that we used to be able to do. So it's a bit like building up capital, and you're all right as long as you can keep the capital bearing interest, then you're okay. But if you're a bit stupid and you're investing your capital wrong, you're investing the money, eventually you're making less and less interest, and eventually you're eating into the capital. And when you're eating into the capital, then you're not able to do things you used to be able to do. And that's like South Africa now. They're not able to do things they used to be able to do. And and eventually that comes about, and then you have a situation where you get more and more people whose place in the economy, a bit like the famine in North Korea. You know, suddenly all these people whose place in the economy involves being a lawyer or a doctor are completely useless, and everything becomes about getting food. That's it. So suddenly, all these people that have got a place in the economy because there's excess. That's why they exist. That's why they can exist. That's why they've got a place. That's why they've got something to do. There's nothing for them to do, and so inevitably there's a huge selection pressure to get food. There's not enough food for the population, and so you get a collapse in the population. And then this is made worse by then it gets cold, so you've got a double whammy. These people are not evolved to live in the cold. They can't cope with disease. These people are evolved to a time of the Roman warm period, and so then you get and then you get a plague because it's cold, and then you just get mass death. And so this has happened, and it happened at the end of the Rome. It happened as the Greek Dark Ages. Don't forget. So the collapse of the Bronze Age collapse, which again was associated with the cold period. And then you get the Greek Dark Ages when it is cold, and they're under harsh selection because it's cold. And then we emerge from that with classical civilization, where they get in some ways they get as high as we got in the late 1800s or whatever on some markers.
The 14th century Black Death is a good example.
In the 50s, yeah, that was a kind of a mini thing because civilization didn't completely collapse though. So it was that it got cold. About a third of Europe or half of Europe were killed. You could argue that actually helped things. Then you get a cold period, and we emerged from that cold period around about 1700. With the Industrial Revolution, we've been under harsh selection for all these centuries in various ways, including the cold. So what could happen is that there would be a complete collapse. There would be a collapse back to basically much simpler conditions, really, and then there'd be a cold period, and that cold period, if things really collapsed, would select for intelligence and whatever, and then civilization would rise up again. So that's one possibility.